Well, hello friends. I am so excited to be here with you today. Oh man, it is looking like it's going to be quite a hot day, but it's nice to be out here before it gets too extremely warm. Welcome. I'm going to introduce myself, but kind of wait for some of you guys to come in. My name is Chris. I have the incredible privilege of working as the content developer for Eagle Brook Church Kids Ministries. So I basically get to write for our kids curriculum and kids programming and all of that, which is so much fun. My goodness, you're logging in quick. That is so wonderful. So many of you are great at being up this early. Maybe you're just morning people. Maybe like me, you have a toddler. I don't think I've been allowed to sleep past 5:30 or 6 in 3 years. So, whatever your reason, I am so glad you are up. Good morning from Maplewood. Oh man, you are all so amazing. I'm so privileged and so excited to talk to you today. But first, I thought I'd just say welcome. Welcome to, this is really my spot. I love to sit out here, and my favorite way of connecting with God, especially just this last summer, I've been loving just sitting out here on our little tiny porch and just bringing my Bible and bringing a pen and just sitting here as long as I can with a toddler and all the demands that takes, and just writing and letting my thoughts connect and reading as much of the Bible as I have time to. And I just love when God brings like two pieces of the Bible together and connects them and makes them somehow more amazing and more beautiful than I thought they were before. And I absolutely love that. So that is just my favorite way to connect with God. If that's not yours, that's totally fine. No worries. This week, we are talking about the third word that Jason gave us a few weeks ago. He talked about thinking about these three super important words, which were Jesus, unity, and grace. So if you haven't gotten to see Jesus Week and Unity Week, go check those out. Goodness, they're so great. But we're talking about grace this week. Jason defined grace as unmerited favor. Great term. That's awesome. Brandon, earlier this week on Monday, defined grace as undeserved goodness. And those are so incredibly powerful. I've found that when I think of grace, when I think about showing people grace, I often feel like I have to wait for somebody to do something wrong. And that's when I show them grace. They do something wrong, I show them grace. But neither of those definitions, I can be good to someone in a way they don't deserve before they do something wrong. So today, I want to talk about something I've just been thinking about. I want to talk about showing grace daily. I want to talk about showing grace in our day-to-day lives. And I think one of the ways that we can do that, one of the most important ways that I've found that I can do that, is just in the way that I see people. I think grace is just as much about how we see people as the way that we treat them. So, we're going to talk about that. Hold on to that. But first, I want to ask you a question, and type in your answers to this because I am really interested to see them. What is something you didn't like as a kid, but now you really like and enjoy? Something you didn't like when you were a kid, now you really like and enjoy. I'll try to watch for your answers, but I also have a short, just a little story for you about something that I didn't like as a kid, which is tomatoes. For me, it was tomatoes. I could not stand them. I could not stand any tomatoes. Scott, I see milk. That's an interesting one. I bet you have a story with that one. But tomatoes were just not part of my diet at all. I could not stand them. And then, about 6 years ago, well, it was 6 years ago, I have to remember this, I got married, and my wife and I went to Disney World for our honeymoon, and one day we were wandering around, realizing we couldn't really afford to eat at Disney World because it's so expensive, but we're just wandering around looking for something to eat that was relatively affordable. And we wandered into an Italian restaurant, and we could not read a single thing on the menu. They did not explain what anything was. We were having so much trouble, so we were just like, whatever, we'll just order some stuff. So we ordered, and what showed up was basically a ton of bread and a ton of tomatoes, and that's all we ended up with. And we learned it was called bruschetta, and we absolutely loved it. And I can tell you, 6 years later, this summer, we have made bruschetta almost every week. We learned to love tomatoes. Now, what amazes me is that tomatoes didn't change. Tomatoes aren't any different now from when I was a kid. But now I absolutely love them. I can eat them every single week because my attitude about them changed. That was really interesting to me. I've seen some things come across like cantaloupe and being alone. That's a interesting habit to get as we grow older. But lots of foods, cantaloupe, sauerkraut. I haven't learned to like sauerkraut yet. Oh man, Jackie, mushrooms. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's another one for me that they're better now that I'm older. Now, again, what amazes me is the things themselves don't change, but our perspective, our attitude, the way that we see them changes. If I can tell you another short story, one of my kids' favorite books right now is called Dragons Love Tacos. So, little shout out there. And there's something in this book that just amazes me. Now, if you've never heard of this book, it's really interesting. There's these dragons, and they absolutely love tacos. That's kind of the premise of the book. But toward the end of the book, they burn down this kid's house. It's not their fault. He gave them spicy salsa, and it's a complex story. You gotta check it out for yourself. But they start to help rebuild this kid's house, and the book asks, why would dragons help you rebuild your house? And then it says something that just amazes me. It says, maybe they're Good Samaritans. And the first time I read that, I was like, that reference is over 2,000 years old. That reference is so old. How did that get in here? And it just struck me in a way that never struck me before. We use that term Good Samaritan so widely and so wildly that we almost forget where it came from. This 2,000 years ago reference just amazed me. And every time I've read it, we read it last night, and I was like, that's just crazy that it uses the phrase Good Samaritan. So today, as you might be able to guess, I want to read the original story of the Good Samaritan. And if you've heard this story, which odds are you probably have, it even made it into Dragons Love Tacos. If you've heard this story, I want to encourage you, every time I read this story, there's something new. I'm probably going to see something new in it today. There is something fantastic and amazing. This is so deep and so incredible, and I hope that I have been able to research and find something that might be new to you about this story too. I actually want to connect it to another section of the Bible. So I'm going to read, it's in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 37, I believe. It says, just then an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus, saying, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus asked, "What is written in the law?" He said, "How do you read it?" And the expert in the law answered. He quoted what Jesus had said before, actually. He said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Jesus said, "You've answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But the man was like, "Whoa, I'm not done." He said, wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And it says, Jesus took up the question and started a story. He said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now, everyone listening to Jesus would have been like, oh, bad news. That road was known for being dangerous. Cliffs on either side, robbers hung out there all the time. Man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers. Everyone's like, well, there you go, he had it coming. They stripped him, beat him up, and fled, leaving him half dead. Now, a priest happened to be going down that road, a leader in the temple. When he saw him, he passed by on the other side, didn't do a thing. In the same way, a Levite, someone who worked at the temple, when he arrived at the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan on his journey came up to him, and when he saw the man, he had compassion on him. He went over to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on olive oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, that's 2 days' wages, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him. When I come back, I'll reimburse you for whatever extra you spend." Which of these 3, Jesus asks, do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The man who was listening replied, "The one who showed mercy on him." And Jesus told him, "Go and do the same." That story is so amazing. And one thing that I want y'all to know as we think about this story is that the relationship between Jews, Jesus' people, the people that was everyone else in the story aside from the Samaritan, and Samaritans was horrible. In fact, if you read commentaries on this, they would probably say to a Jewish person of that day, there was likely no such thing as a good Samaritan. They were upheld as examples of bad. They worshipped at a different temple than the Jewish people, which was considered heretical. They considered them lawbreakers, unclean, outsiders. It was real bad. They were about as far apart and different as they could be, but they lived super close together. More aggressive Jews, if they had to travel through Samaria, often they had to travel from north to south through Samaria, they would actually go all the way around, cross the Jordan River, go on the other side, then go south, cross back over, and travel under to Samaria. They would avoid it at any costs. Jesus did not avoid it. We'll come back to that in just a second. But what can we learn about the way we see people in this story? Well, everyone has a perspective. The priest and the Levite, they saw this guy and said, not going to help him out. But the Samaritan saw somebody who was hurt, somebody who needed love. Now, the lawyer listening to the story saw someone he hated in the Samaritan. But my question is, what did Jesus see? This is something I missed about this story for years. What was Jesus' perspective? What's he doing here? I've read this dozens of times and I did not pick this out. And I think one of the best ways to find Jesus' perspective on this story is actually to jump back to right before this story. Something that happened right before Jesus told this story that changed the way I saw the Good Samaritan forever. Oh my goodness. It's in Luke chapter 9, so you probably just have to turn one page back if you're following. Verses 51 to 56. It's really quick. It says, when the days were coming to a close for Jesus to be taken up, he's getting close to the point where he's on the cross, he determined to journey to Jerusalem. He sent messengers ahead of him, and on the way they entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the Samaritans did not welcome him because he determined to journey to Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven to consume them?" Whoa, James and John, okay. But Jesus turned and rebuked them, and they went to another village. Now, Jesus didn't do anything right then, but you can almost hear him thinking, the next story I tell, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make a Samaritan the hero. You see, Jesus didn't tell this story about Samaritans to prove, hey, I know a lot of good Samaritans. They're not all bad people. No, they had wronged Jesus. When he tried to show up at their town, they said, no, get out of here. You're not welcome. Leave. We'd rather have you sleep on the road than stay in our town. But that didn't stop Jesus from loving them. You see, when they saw Samaritans, James and John only saw what the Samaritans were, what they had been, what they had done. But Jesus saw what they could be. Today, the Samaritans are heroes because of Jesus' story. Even though they were unkind to him, that never stopped him loving them. Now, this thought is something that I've been thinking about and holding on to, so maybe you can get something out of it too. Grace doesn't mean giving people the love we think they are worth. Instead, God calls us to give them the love and grace that we are capable of. See, somebody isn't necessarily lovable inherently, but God calls us to choose to love them no matter what. I think that's a radical new way of seeing others that Jesus shows us. See, the disciples thought, hey, how can we get even? How can we come out on top? And Jesus thought, how can I show Samaritans what they could be, what they could become? So the question I want to ask is, how do we see the people around us? For me, I've found it really helpful to ask, what's my first thought about this person? When I see my coworker, when I see my spouse, when I see my kid, what's my first thought about this person? If we look at them and think, how can I show them grace? How can I point out what's great about them instead of how can I justify myself or get even or come out on top? I think things will completely change. The amazing thing is this is what Jesus has done for every one of us. He looked at me and he saw a sinner and he saw someone that was worthy of love. He saw someone broken and he saw someone with potential at the same time. See, Jesus sees a worth in every person that never changes, not because they're lovable inherently, but because he loves them infinitely. I so badly want to be the Good Samaritan so many times, but more often I think I'm the one on the road in need of that grace, in need of that love. So what if? I want to wrap up just what if we chose to see people for what they could be? What if we trained our first thoughts to point out what is best about people? Well, I think 3 things would happen. We'd find that we don't have to wait until something bad happens to show people grace. We can show people grace daily by focusing on the best in them. Second, we'd find that people usually meet our expectations of them. John Maxwell has a great quote about this. He says, people rise and fall to meet your level of expectations for them. If you express skepticism and doubt, they'll return your lack of confidence with mediocrity. But if you believe in them and expect them to do well, they'll go the extra mile trying to do their best. I think that's so true. Finally, we'll find our ability to show grace and love grows. Like building a muscle, our ability to show grace and love will grow. And we'll find I have so much more capacity to show love and grace than I did yesterday because I've practiced, because I've made it a habit. So, right now, I want you to post, whether you're watching this now or whether you're watching this later, I want you to post this. Someone who has shown grace to you. Undeserved goodness, unmerited favor. Someone who has chosen to see you in a great way. Post about them. Thank them. Because those people are amazing that chose to show grace. I think of a professor from my college, Professor Payne. She taught me to teach. And she saw me teach when it was real bad. I did such a horrible job, and she watched me at times, and she let me know how I could improve, but she never stopped saying, you can do better. You have potential. You can do this. Even when I probably didn't deserve it. So I want to say thank you to her today, but post somebody that has given you grace and thank them today. But then my challenge for you is to share grace with someone this week. I see so many names coming across, our parents, our spouses. That's so awesome. So who has God given you the opportunity to see in a new, more gracious way this week? Who could we see like Jesus does? Is it my son? Could I point out what he's doing well rather than criticizing, or just instead of saying what's wrong? My spouse? Could I do the same thing? Instead of making my first thought a critical thought, could I make it something positive? What if I only said positive things for the entire week? What would be different? My coworker? How often do I try to make one of my coworkers look good rather than myself? Our friends? Someone we've disagreed with? The list could go on and on. But I want to close just by saying this. God has given us so much grace. Not so we can hold on to it, but so we can give it away. I'm so thankful every one of you is here this morning. I want to wrap up by praying for us today, because wow, do I need prayer for this challenge. God, thank you for every single person watching this video. Thank you for the grace that you have shown every one of us. Thank you for the grace you've shown me. Thank you for pouring that out on us every single day. And thank you for showing us what grace looks like through your son, Jesus. God, it is such an honor and such a privilege to get to know you. I ask that you would lead us, that you would show us opportunities to show grace this week. In your name, amen. All right, it has been a privilege and honor to be with you today. Goodbye, everyone.